Hello. I realize I'm like a week overdue with this one, but I've been busy with my own filmmaking project. Honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm doing these at this point. It's sort of become like a yearly tradition to analyze Game of Thrones every single time it comes out, but especially with this recent season, I've sort of lost interest, I have to admit, and I take none of the responsibility for that. I think it's entirely the show's doing for having me lost interest. Fact of the matter is, it's gotten worse, right? I mean, I'm trying to praise things that I think still deserve some amount of praise, but overall, it's sort of deteriorated into, you know, basically high budget schlock. And it's part of this isn't anybody's fault. I mean, I'm trying to work in film now more, and I can understand, and I just imagine that the production of this show is a nightmare of gargantuan proportions. So some level of forgiveness is in order to D&D and the whole team, but still, it still feels like the ball is being dropped, at the very least on a writing perspective, especially if you watch like Preston Jacobs' vids and all that. All I would say is some of the things that I've actually predicted have ended up happening. I ended up predicting way before the show had even gotten to this point, spoiler alert, that Sansa would be the one to undo Littlefinger. I predicted that would happen. My only wish would have been that it didn't happen the way it did, that it would have been more clever. Like, she learned something about him, and then you see it from her perspective, how she tricks him and beats him, rather than what the show did was they basically sort of cheated in order to show Littlefinger's demise. And it was so bloody unearned, the way it went down, the whole thing. They effectively just had Bran, who's a seer who could just know everything, reveal to Sansa and Arya exactly what Littlefinger did, and then, of course, they accuse him of this and execute him right there. Now, there's already flaws with the whole context of that the other lords would simply accept that happening, but beyond that, it's just very anticlimactic, considering the fact that Littlefinger was, I mean, he was a big deal. You know, this is the guy who started the War of the Five Kings, for fuck's sake, right? He deserved a little bit more than just a cheap plot of him trying to turn two sisters against each other. What was that even going to be about? What did he think he was going to accomplish? It also sort of undermines the character in the sense that we don't know in the books what Littlefinger's actual goals are, and they do seem to be a bit more, more grand and interesting than just upset the balance and gain power for yourself, in as weak and petty as a way as he does. Like Varys, his goal ends up being intertwined with what's his name, Illyrio, and Daenerys, and Aegon and all that. What's Littlefinger's goal? What's his ultimate plan? It's something to do with Harrenhal. I mean, it's more complex than just let's stir shit up and then try to gain power, because that's basically what it did. And it's just such an insult, because the first few seasons of the show really did earn a lot of what ended up happening. All of the deaths and all the demises, the Ned's execution, the Red Wedding, these things felt earned. It felt like the bad guys actually deserved to win in those scenarios, because they got there fairly. They plotted and they did exactly what, they did exactly what they would have done in those situations. Felt like they could have and should have happened. This felt forced, and I feel like that's my general opinion about the entire season, and probably the entire show at this point, is that they're just forcing in the ending because they have to wrap up the show. It's season 7, there's only 10 episodes, 16 episodes left of the whole thing. They have to close all the loops, they have to kill off all the characters that don't have that have to be killed off. They have to, they have to wrap things up, but they're doing it at a very hurried pace. You note that there's no sense of like time and space anymore. Ships and entire fleets can cross around the entire continent of Westeros in like a second, within a shot, and then Sam travels from the Citadel all the way up to Winterfell in like a week, and the characters are just wherever they need to be magically at a time. Daenerys goes all the way north of the Wall very quickly. It all happens way too fast, and it happens too fast because they need the characters in a certain place to have the scene go down. But there's no adherence anymore to the rules of time and space, and how quickly it would actually take for these events to transpire. And that's why everything feels very rushed. And because everything feels very rushed, everything feels very unearned. The rushedness kills the entire, at least for me, it kills the entire impact of all of these events. That by itself makes them feel fairly unearned. And it's a shame because the events that are going down are pretty important. All of the things that are happening, basically every single scene feels very important. It feels like big things are going down. We're saying goodbye to a lot of these characters. It's their end, it's their execution, or it's a big, very important meeting, or there's always something. There's always some big plot-driven thing happening in every scene, which is a good thing, right? That's a good thing. Nothing feels vestigial, but it feels it's too little. It's way too little. It's way less than it should be, and that's just the way it is. What I can praise this season, this half season for, is the fact that we get to see a lot of things in Westeros that we haven't been, seen before, which is pretty good. We finally get to see the Citadel. We finally get to see Casterly Rock. We finally get to see Eastwatch. We get to see Highgarden, etc., etc. We see a lot of places we've barely seen. We either haven't seen at all or we've barely seen. That said, though, along with the hurried thing, we see them for a very short amount of time, and it's fairly unsatisfying. I mean, we do get to see Eastwatch, but not a lot happens there. In fact, they just sort of go there to venture north of the Wall. And why do they go to Eastwatch and not Castle Black? Also, that's also a strange. I don't know if that ran out in the season, but that's very. I thought that was weird. Is my point. We get to see the Citadel, although we don't really get to discover anything at the Citadel. The whole Citadel thing functioned only to serve to Sam that there's this annulment and Jon is actually Aegon Targaryen, which seems pretty weak in my opinion. I thought that there was something, there was far more going on, that Sam would be like a Bran type character. He'd have access to some sort of information, access to some sort of information and be sort of a string puller from afar that isn't actually involved, kind of like what Bran's turning into. I know that George R. R. Martin likes those kinds of characters, but I thought that's what that plot was going. That's probably where it will go in the books. Look forward to those. Then we have, the Faceless Men plot also went nowhere. We always thought that the Faceless Men had more to do, especially since there are Faceless Men in the Citadel now, for some reason. So we don't know what that's all about, and we never will, not in the show. Arya's basically the Faceless Man thing was just used for a tool for Arya to get to the next level, where she turns into Wolverine and can just shapeshift and not die and do whatever she wants. And it's weird because she's not actually a Faceless Man. She's just... She just uses their tools and their skills, but she doesn't obey their tenets whatsoever. And that was actually supposed to be a problem when she was training under them. So we don't get to find out what happens with that. We almost found out about it when Sansa looked at the masks, and she was like, "What are those masks?" But we never learn about it in depth, and there's no time. It's weird and disappointing overall, I'd say, because usually, at least before with this show, I was always sort of looking forward to Game of Thrones every week. I was just like, oh, it's Game of Thrones, great, I'll see the next thing that happens, and there's always at least something somewhat interesting. I was curious as to how they would show certain locations, how they would show certain characters, how they would display certain scenes. But at this point, it's just like, all of the scenes that are playing out aren't as good as the scenes that are going to play out in the books anyway, because they're off book, and they don't have the same. I don't know. They don't have the same quality to them that the scenes that were originally in the books were. And on top of that, it all feels very rushed. So it's not as well written, and it's more rushed than it was. At least beforehand, when you had the books, you know, Dave and Dan, they had this like quality work to fall back on, and that's why the show actually felt good, was because it there's a sense of there's something very intangible, I guess, and ineffable that was sort of just sitting underneath the lines, but you could tell that there was something real down there, that there was something that felt good. You know, it felt like quality. It felt like sort of iconic in a way, underneath, you know, all the dialogue just subtly sitting in there, because it had this sense of just realism and just unforgettableness that was there mainly due to George R. R. Martin. But now it's not there anymore. Now it's just sort of it's riding off of that sort of enigmatic, ineffable quality now, when just using it to create action. And that's, at the very least, at least we're getting cool action scenes, I guess. That's the one point of praise you can give. Is there was a lot of battles this season. There was a ship battle. There was an ice battle in episode 9. There was, I think that's actually, I mean, there was a little bit of a battle in Casterly Rock as well. Oh, and there was a battle in the train car. I mean, there was a lot of battles, which makes sense, because we're in the middle of a war, so they really do have a chance to just really show off the battles. And that's good. The battle sequences were done very well. You know, the battles felt unique and, I guess, memorable in a way. The one where Daenerys storms in and burns all the caravan and stuff, that was all very good. The battle in the ice at the end was a little stupid, because they were... Whites are supposed to be very hard to kill if you don't have fire, and they were just sort of annihilating them. Even though they were outnumbered and obviously going to lose, but they were annihilating the whites that were just surrounding them. And I feel like IRL, realistically, they would have just been destroyed very quickly. Those whites would overpower them instantly, because it's very hard to actually kill a white. As they show us in the next episode, when they take a white down to King's Landing. So, you know, that was a bit of a problem. And then the whole, like, Jon... then there was a bit of just fake drama, like Jon falls into the water and they have to leave, but then he climbs out and then he goes and escapes anyway and doesn't die of hypothermia. Like, what was the point of all that? What was the point of that happening? Just to show Benjen Stark and him die? Benjen Stark could have shown up earlier. If they wanted to bring Benjen Stark into the mix, they could have done that. He could have come to their rescue as they were being surrounded or something. You know, this didn't need to happen after Jon fell off. So why did they have Jon fall into the water there? What was the drama there? I actually thought, when that happened, weirdly, I thought that maybe Jon was going to be turned into a white. Part of me thought that would happen, because he was left behind. And that would have been a cool twist. And then the prince that was promised is actually, like, the villain. And, you know, that could have been an interesting, you know, sort of thing that they could have done. I don't know. But they didn't do that. They just sort of, you know, he just escapes again. And now he's superhero Jon, who's also Aegon Targaryen. And, what do we even call him now? Jon Targaryen? Aegon Targaryen? Aegon Snow? It's also just like, his name doesn't even matter, is the thing. Like, Jon Snow could become King of Westeros fairly, by virtue of the fact that he's Jon Snow. He doesn't need to have Aegon Targaryen as his title or some shit to deserve that, he doesn't need that to be special, I guess, is the point. So, you know, that's essentially all it is that I have to say. It's not really an analysis here, just sort of a little bit of a rant and my opinion. Overall, like I say, I'm fairly disappointed with the show. I think after Season 8 finishes, I'm going to do an overall analysis of the entire show, which would obviously be longer, not just of that season, and that's going to be a separate video. but that's not going to happen for a year. So we'll see what happens there. But the show as a whole definitely deserves to be talked about, not just these individual seasons. So we'll I guess that's all it is I have to say for now. We're not even dealing with a complete season here, so there's not much to share. The battles were good, the visuals were good, the production was all very nice, but the plot and the writing were bleh. And it's one of those things where you just wish that they had an infinite budget, and you wish that they had infinite time, and you wish that they could just make this thing properly before presenting it, because it would have been great if they did. I think I've said this pretty much from the beginning, is I think if Game of Thrones adhered to the books as strictly as possible, and really had all the time and all the money in the world to fulfill that, that level of narrative, then it would be the best show ever made. If it did that, it would be better than The Wire. As it stands, I still think The Wire is much better than this and Breaking Bad. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Cheers.